Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Special congrats to the fans, the DMZ Army and Western DMZ today, Bill. We may not have a speaker as of the time we're recording this, but we do have a World Series lineup. Your Arizona Diamondbacks will face off against the Texas Rangers, Bill.
Uh, I've been barely following this. So these are, uh, they're both wild card teams, right?
I think so. I know that the Rangers sadly defeated the Orioles, my team. My team won the division, the American League East. So yeah, I think these are teams that got hot at the right time, and the Diamondbacks, took out the Philadelphia Phillies in Philadelphia. Bill, imagine that. They throw batteries and snowballs at Santa Claus there. Come on.
So Philadelphia, which has some of the most intense fans in the country, were beaten at home by a team who can't sell out their own park for playoff games. Do I understand that correctly?
I think that's about right. A team that plays in a most of the time in a dome. I think it's retractable. I was explaining to my kids that in Philadelphia, they take sports like super seriously. I feel like in Arizona, there's a lot of other fun stuff to do. And so baseball is kind of an afterthought. And there are also, it's transient. There's a lot of people like snowbirds who come to Arizona part of the year and then go back home. But people who live in Philly live in Philly. And so I think the intensity is a little different. But you know what? Home field advantage this year has not mattered. I mean, it happened to my Orioles. They won the division. They had the first two games were home in Baltimore, dropped both. I mean, the crowd was full of people with orange terrible towels. It didn't matter. And in the Texas game, which was the Houston Astros versus the Texas Rangers, I think it was the case that every single away team won. So nobody won a home game in the whole series. It's very weird.
Now, you mentioned Texas beat your Orioles. So are you the kind of person who wants the team that beat his team to win it all, so he can at least say, "Well, at least we got beat by like the best team. What were we supposed to do?" Or do you want to exact vengeance on the team that beat you and want to see them lose?
I'm okay with I think both theories are legit. I could buy into either theory. I'm going to go with vengeance, Bill. I'm going to go. So I'm rooting for the Arizona Diamondbacks to.
Is there a good guy, bad guy here? Is there a reason why we should hate one of these teams?
I don't think so. And part of that is, I think that's part of why this World Series will not be terribly compelling. Both of these teams are kind of likable, somewhat vanilla. I think there's nobody that I really hate on the teams. It would be easy to hate Philadelphia or Bryce Harper, or you know what I mean. But like, I don't think that there's. I think that Texas and Arizona are both somewhat likable.
And there's no compelling characters. There's no outspoken personalities.
There are some. There are some, and I don't know that much about these teams. I'm more of an Oriole fan than I am a baseball fan. But the manager of the Texas Rangers, by the way, I think he has won six consecutive Game Sevens, which is impressive. I think that's the case. But he seems like a good guy, likable guy. Maybe a storyline there. But I don't know how much of this I'm actually going to watch. But congrats to the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'll say it. I'll be pulling for you, even if I don't watch. And your fans may leave early, maybe in the seventh inning if you're down. That's okay.
So Matt, before we got into the speaker business, which even though it's Wednesday morning and the vote hasn't happened yet on the Mike Johnson nomination, it does seem like he's on the verge of getting it. So I dipped into X just to see if there's any latest and greatest. And so a CNN reporter, Lauren Fox, just posted, I asked Susan Collins what it would be like to work with Johnson on spending issues, and she said she doesn't know him, but was going to Google him this morning. So
welcome to the party, pal.
right, I think almost everybody is on the same boat where they're like, "Who is this guy?" I mean, he definitely comes from a very conservative district. He's a very conservative person, from what a little I know. Uh, you, as a member of the conservative movement in good standing, still,
No, I
like,
don't think
do
we did.
you have any intimate knowledge of Mike Johnson?
No, I had to Google him too. But it's interesting because it seems like, and I think you know more about the kind of 435 rank and file members than I do. I mean, I learned a little bit from my book, "Filthy Rich Politicians," where I, investigated the really rich ones, like Hearn, who was Kevin Hearn, who is one of the Mick congressman. He made his money from McDonald's, owning
So
McDonald's.
Mike Johnson's not in your book.
I don't think so. I don't think so. At least he's not. He's not a top 10. That's for sure. Um, so I don't know much about him. It seems like you can find evidence that he's a sane sort of moderate, and then you can find evidence that he is an election denier who tapped into his knowledge of constitutional law to try to overturn the elections.
Well, I from what little I know, I think maybe temperamentally he doesn't come across as pugnacious and confrontational as Jim Jordan did, but he was still pretty closely involved with the Trump team in trying to get the results overturned by pushing the theory that state legislatures should have the right to send their own electors, and argue that the rules in their state should not have been determined by courts. Courts should not have been allowed to expand the franchise through vote by mail procedures, things like that.
Well, and I think that is a legitimate point.
Well, not
But
when
I think
embraced
that
by the Supreme Court at this juncture. I mean, we've litigated that theory.
Well, that the Supreme Court gets things right and they get things wrong. I mean, that's we abide by it, but just stick with me here for a second. I think by the letter of the Constitution, it is state legislatures who should be making the call based uh, based on voting procedure. Now, look, during 2020, there was a global pandemic. And it seems perfectly reasonable to me that for that time, you would want people to be able to vote by mail rather than standing in lines at polling locations, because doing so could spread the virus or also disenfranchise people who simply wouldn't turn out to vote because they're afraid of dying. So I understand why it happened. And normally I am not a big fan of early voting or mail-in voting. I would rather people vote on election day at the polls. But I understand why, because of COVID-19, that's probably wasn't a great idea in 2020. Having said that, I think that's a decision that should have been made by legislators, not by courts. But if Trump felt that way, he should have challenged it at the time, not retroactively. You can't and by the way, let's not pretend that that's what Trump was really upset about, that mail-in voting was his concern. No, they were saying that Venezuela was stealing the election and that ballots were being stuffed and that, you know, there were a million different crazy conspiracies. So this does not absolve these Republicans, but I
Right.
do, I'll put a little asterisk there. What do you think?
Well, I think to do it after the fact was 100% disingenuous,
Yes.
and the deliberate intent to disenfranchise people who voted legitimately based on what the state courts had decided. I mean, you can debate, well, maybe the courts shouldn't have had this authority. And I think it's a pretty cramped reading of the Constitution to say that legislatures have unchecked power, a document that is wholly based on checks and balances, that a legislature has power that no court can have any interpretation of, that cannot be balanced at all
I
with
mean,
what's in the state constitution
I
or
don't
the
have
federal
it in front of
constitution.
me, but I think it's pretty specific that, like, the state legislature shall determine the rules and manage and oversee elections.
But the U.S. Congress has enumerated powers, but the Supreme Court still reviews it and interprets it. That's what that's the whole point of the judiciary. You can go back and read the Federalist Papers.
Whatever the case may be, that should have been challenged at the time.
Yeah. So once the election occurs,
yes,
and either you didn't challenge it beforehand or you lost that challenge, and the votes are cast by the rules that were agreed upon, that's it.
Yeah. So now here we are, though, right? I mean, we've had Steve Scalise, we've had Jim Jordan, we had
Tom
Emmer, straight out of Minnesota, I want to say.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And now, so we're on our fourth nominee, the fourth. In the future, everyone will get to be the Speaker of the House nominee for 15 minutes. So we're on I think our fourth. Bill, it seems like now last week we recorded kind of on the bubble, and we said we don't think Jordan will become Speaker, but you never know. I think today we're starting to be like, maybe this one could happen.
I think it's looking pretty good. The various people, he's coming from the right, but the more moderate types have been saying they're gonna support him. I think there were a couple people that voted present in their internal vote yesterday who said, "Okay, we're gonna vote for him on the floor." So I'm not aware of anybody vocally saying I am not going to vote for him on the floor. And I had on the last show, I had said, I think 2 or 3 shows ago, I said, I think it's more likely that the moderates fall in line for a conservative than the far right folks fall in line for a relative moderate. Then after Jim Jordan got snuffed, I said, okay, well, maybe I was wrong on that one. But here we are, where it does seem like the moderates are going to fall in line behind a person with a very hard right record, not only on the election denialism stuff, but he's also been a opponent of Ukraine aid, which is a sensitive subject right now. It's going to come up very soon. I believe he voted against the continuing resolution to keep the government open. And he's also espoused some very hard right social conservative views. I was talking about beforehand. He complained about a TV cartoon called Little Demon because his 11-year-old was watching TV with him, and an ad for it came on the screen. And this is a goofy show about Satan's child that tries to live a normal life in Delaware, and he treated it like it was like straight up propaganda supporting Satanism. So there's that sort of weird stuff in there. So if moderates were worried about having a face of the party that's not great for swing voters, they have reason to be concerned. I think if you're a Democrat, you have reason to be concerned that you can't be very confident this person's going to keep the government open or support aid to Ukraine, and possibly be a good faith actor after the 2024 election.
Yeah.
So
no, it'll be interesting though, Bill, because even though it does feel like he is inching now toward having enough votes, and 217 or whatever that number will be, there are members like Ken Buck. Full disclosure, he's a client of my wife. But Ken Buck said previously that he would not support anybody who did not acknowledge the 2020 election victory of Joe Biden. I think that's correct that Buck said that. And so you can only lose like 4 congressmen. So will someone like Buck change or what's this guy's name, Bill?
I apologize. I was looking up something.
That's okay. That's all right. You multitask. Who's the guy running for speaker currently?
Oh, Mike Johnson.
Mike Johnson. See, that's how unfamiliar I am with him. I literally do not know the guy's name. And it sounds like a fake name. I'm going to say that may be an alias, Mike Johnson. Although you could probably do better. But anyway, this guy, Mike Johnson, as you noted, Bill, I mean, he temperamentally seems more moderate. And then maybe that is the key to this, that the reason he might actually be able to pull it off.
Well, he I don't know what he told the more moderate types. So apparently, when Jim Jordan was trying to get it, he was reaching out to the more moderate types and trying to assuage them. I'm not going to shut the government down. I got a plan to keep the government open. Uh, uh, we can talk about Ukraine aid. He wasn't coming in hard and fast on it, but he couldn't. He didn't have enough trust in folks for them to feel really confident, so they didn't acquiesce. I know in the speaker forum that recently happened, that Dick Johnson was a part of, they were kind of skirting those issues. And so I don't know if he's had any kind of quieter conversations to put people at ease, or they're just like crossing their fingers and saying, I'm sick of all this. We got to go with somebody. But it's certainly an unknown what exactly he's going to do for the issues that are at hand. We have a deadline on November 17th to keep the government open because the stopgap bill runs out. We have a supplemental package that Biden has proposed for aid to Ukraine and Israel and the southern border that some people want to separate on the right because they don't want Israel to be attached to Ukraine aid. They want to vote on those separately. And we just don't know what Johnson's going to do on these things. And trying to be asked questions point blank by reporters yesterday about the election in 2020, he got booed by the Congress people. So I was distracted before, Matt, because I was rereading what the Washington Post Greg Sargent wrote yesterday morning, which was headlined "The Quiet Vindication of Hakeem Jeffries." And he leads with, when Democrats refused to save Kevin McCarthy from the hard right faction of House members who ousted the California Republican as Speaker earlier this month, the pundit recriminations were thunderous and damning. Democrats had, quote unquote, burned the future possibilities of bipartisanship. They squandered the chance to own, quote, the adult brand, unquote. They should have, quote, saved the country, unquote, but betrayed it instead.
I think this is a subtweet of us, Bill.
It's a direct subtweet of you because the adult brand quote links to your piece. He didn't link to my piece, so I may not have been on his mind. But all those folks were making more of the you should be the bigger person argument. Whereas, my argument was a little different. My argument was it is good for Democrats to have someone who's going to keep the government open and reduce chaos and enhance stability. So he may not have been thinking of my take here. But he then goes on to say, but now with the Republicans still struggling to elect the speaker, Democrat strategy, largely charted by Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, is plainly working. The New York Democrats' approach to navigating the GOP disaster isn't just proving to be good politics for his party, it's likely to produce a better result for the country as well. And I think that latter argument...
This was when Tom Emmer was looking to be the likely...
Yeah, it was before those votes came in.
And Democrats were possibly going to vote present to support Emmer, right? To allow him to... I mean, there was talk about that.
There was some talk about it. But
not going to happen for this guy.
The piece ends by saying, rather than once again expecting Democrats to rush and help Republicans clean up their own mess, it would require the GOP to take responsibility for what's happening in its ranks and compel the party to seriously entertain working with Democrats to make the House a functional governing body again, which seems like it's not going to happen. So, look, I think it is possible that Mike Johnson is a Nixon goes to China type of conservative, and maybe he does keep the government open and has enough good faith with the Matt Gaetzes of the conference to allow him to do that. So I don't want to go the opposite way and say well, I'm totally right and you're totally wrong. Maybe it still works out in the end. Maybe he doesn't throw the 2024 election in total disarray despite his denialism before. People can do unpredictable things. But I think on the face of it, Johnson is not an immediate upgrade from McCarthy.
Yeah.
He has not, the way this process played out did not disempower the Gaetz 8. It has not moved the Republican conference closer to the moderate Democrats. they are still operating on what can we do to keep our own party unified. And that doesn't automatically make it easier to keep the government open and fund Ukraine. Maybe it still works out, but I don't feel like I was mistaken in saying this was an unnecessary gamble to take, and now you got even harder character and a harder GOP conference to deal with. That's where I would land on
Yeah,
this.
no, I think you and I, our argument is pretty much non-falsifiable. We never said this is a sure loser for Democrats. I think we said that the stakes are high and the gamble's not worth it because you could end up with someone much worse and being second in line to the presidency, and someone who may not fund Ukraine, someone who may not be able to keep the government open, someone who could maybe even tank the economy at some point. And so it's not worth the gamble, is what we said. And maybe it will work out for Dems. But I wouldn't have taken the chance. And if you want to argue, this is getting to be a trope now, Bill, like a cliche, but if you want to argue that MAGA is an existential threat to this nation, then you shouldn't be in the business of enabling and empowering people who are the most vociferous advocates of it.
Well, I think there's sort of two schools of thought on the Democratic side here. One was that they're all MAGA.
Yeah.
They're all equally terrible, and it's not our place or responsibility to fix that problem for you. If you're going to swap McCarthy out for someone who's equally terrible, and we don't think McCarthy, we think McCarthy is terrible. We don't trust him to keep the government open. We don't trust him on Ukraine. So if they have to spend 3 weeks hashing out amongst themselves and pick someone who's also awful, that's just not my problem. And now you have this other argument that's unnecessarily wholly separate from it, that Sargent articulated, which is we have a good chance here of making things better out of the chaos by proving that the hard right is implacable and then leaving you no choice but to work with us. And again, that may still work out on an issue by issue basis, as it was with McCarthy.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same thing as when Democrats were literally supporting MAGA candidates.
I don't agree those things are analogous, but go on.
Oh, I do. But for those who might have forgotten, there were numerous times during the 2022 midterms when Democrats elevated, including financially, MAGA candidates because they thought they would be easier to defeat. And in fact, it turned out it worked for Democrats.
Well, that's why I disagree with you. I mean, I don't want to rehash an old argument, but I think that was done very surgically, where the chance of success were very high. They didn't do it haphazardly. They didn't really elevate anybody who had a really good chance of actually getting into power and making matters worse. After the election, this I think is different, where you had a person, Kevin McCarthy, who was, yet set aside his rhetoric, which was annoying and disingenuous and frustrating, and look at the bills he was putting on the floor at the end of the process and say, he's actually doing all we can really expect the guy can do for us here.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Have the trust to see it that way.
I don't like playing with matches in general, but I do think you have it's a distinction. It's a fair distinction that I think it's riskier what they're doing. In the speaker, I will say, do you remember? I believe Democrats boosted, was it Mastriano in Pennsylvania? Is that right? And he's a kind of a MAGA candidate.
Kinda.
And right, and then as I recall, now it's been a while, but as I recall, the governor of Pennsylvania would have had some sort of power, and maybe in picking
the Secretary of
State. And so when Pennsylvania could be the difference between overturning an election, that becomes a pretty high stakes bet. It paid off for them.
I mean,
But
and it wasn't close. I mean, I think they read the room correctly. This guy's got no chance winning statewide, and he had no chance winning statewide.
listen, while we're talking Pennsylvania, I want to talk about your boy Fetterman.
Yeah.
I have not been a fan of his in general over the years.
You had to go the trust fund knock on him, right?
I did, yeah. He's in Filthy Rich Politicians, because he comes across as this blue collar everyman, and in fact, he couldn't have gotten where he is had his dad not subsidized his income for many years.
While he was mayor, he was mayor of a working class city with a mayor position that was not properly salaried. He was not really meant to be a full-time position, and so he got to be mayor because he was being financially supported by his family.
Yeah, at the age of like 45 or something. This isn't like 25. But whatever the case, he has won me over, at least this week, Bill. I don't know what has happened, but he, in the last month or so, has come back with a vengeance after, kind of being down and out. And I'm liking his tweets. I don't know what it is. It seems like he's on fire, Bill.
Well, the one that you really like that you share with me, there was some item about, I think it was Mike Lee wants to put forth a bill to separate Israel aid and Ukraine aid, and Fetterman tweeted, "F that," using the full F bomb.
I don't know why that tickled me, as they say. It tickled me.
He's gone full Bulworth. He's being himself. What's that?
Bulworth or Bulwark, right. Either way.
It may well be that he's not even worrying about whether he's going to run again or not. He may be one term and out for all I know.
Well, I haven't seen Bulworth in a while, but I think once you are liberated and you have no Fs left to give, ironically, that could make you super popular. Like once you don't care anymore, once you quit caring, then it comes together, and it seems like that's happening. I don't know.
He was always kind of like that. Not that he had no political calibrations at all, because I think he did. He definitely did a dance on fracking, for example. But he always had an unvarnished air to him. And when he first got into the Senate, he went through a very severe bout of depression. So you weren't really seeing that all that much. And now that he has gone out of being hospitalized for it, I can't know if he's like all better. I'm sure it's certainly not as cut and dry as that. But you're definitely seeing his persona shine through again, and just not really worrying about what this means from politically going forward. Now, I think if he hadn't had a stroke and he hadn't gone through this severe bout of depression, he would have been talked about very readily as a VP possibility or potential presidential possibility. Future of the Democratic Party. This is how Democrats get back, working class Democrats in Pennsylvania and the Midwest again. And that talk is obviously, not happening. And maybe if it had been happening, he might have been a little bit more careful. He might have been a little bit more, okay, I got to really, adhere to the dress code and show that I can be, an adult here. And since that's, I think, not really on the table, just letting his freak flag fly, which I think is great. I think I don't think it's hurting his ability to do the job. It may mean that he doesn't run it next time, which I think would be fine if he feels, what, I've been through a lot. I have a lot of health issues I gotta take care of, and it's time for the next person. That's his personal decision. That's fine. But it also comes out as like people in Pennsylvania say, I like this guy. Now, I wasn't so sure, but this is the kind of guy I was kind of hoping for, and that would be fine too.
Well, Bill, speaking of people who are mentioned as vice president or possible candidates to inherit the mantle from Joe Biden, did you see that California Governor Gavin Newsom is meeting with Chinese leader Xi? Did you see this?
I think I did see that.
That seems interesting to me. I don't know.
I mean, California has a massive economy of its own, and I think I think Pacific trade missions from California governors are not unusual. I don't know if there have been meetings with the Chinese leader before, but it wouldn't shock me if it's not unprecedented.
Interesting, nonetheless. All right, so sorry for that. Getting derailed in Pennsylvania there for a second, but I guess just to kind of close the loop, we have this probably later today, of course, as we're recording, a vote for speaker. I assume that Democrats will not help Johnson.
No, of course
based
not.
on his
Absolutely not. They will
record.
all vote Jeffries.
So he he can only afford to lose, I think, 4 Republicans,
depending who shows up. I mean, there might be some absentees or, in theory, presence, but I think that's the basic assumption.
Maybe it goes multiple votes. We'll have to kind of wait and see how that plays out.
We should talk about the plea deals that have been cropping up in the Trump cases, but I want to preface that because I wrote a piece in the Washington Monthly newsletter yesterday, which I subheaded "Why Republicans Can't Fix Themselves." This is before the Johnson nomination, but it doesn't undercut it, And the point I was trying to make was the reason why the speaker battle has gotten so complicated was because a speaker vote is typically just about personal relationships. It's just an insider game. It's not really the forum for bigger philosophical, ideological questions. And certainly personal relationships, I'm sure are still part of this, but we had things derailed because of questions about spending levels and questions about Ukraine, questions about shutdown tactics that made unity difficult for Republicans. And the point I was making was we don't usually hash these things out in speaker votes. We tend to hash when there are divides that crop up because of new challenges. We tend to hash these things out in presidential primaries. That is a useful mechanism to adjudicate what direction is this party going in. Reagan took the party on a conservative course from the 76 primary, which he came up short in, and then the 80 primary, which he triumphed. Bill Clinton took the party on a moderate course via the 92 primary. Barack Obama recalibrated Democratic foreign policy in the 2008 primary. And even though there was this uprise of youthful democratic socialism, Joe Biden said that's not what this party is about. And that took the party on its course after 2020. Right now, we're not having that in the Republican primary in 2024. Trump has essentially on a glide path to the nomination at this point, but it's not really been a debate over Trumpism. We're not debating the underlying issues of it at all. I mean, there's obviously some nominal debate happening in the debates, but which Trump is not participating in, so no one's really paying attention. So Trump being the nominee doesn't really provide a clear mandate amongst rank and file Republicans saying, we're an America First party. We don't want Ukraine aid. We're not even debating budget levels here in the and shutdown tactics in the primary. So Trump has always been an impurity in what had been a conservative consensus in the Republican Party. And so he creates ideological division in the party, and we're not really adjudicating and resolving it through the presidential primary. And the fact that you could just to be even more convoluted, the fact that we're having these plea deals happen from people inside the Trump circle, in a normal world, this would be causing 5-alarm panic that we're on the verge of nominating someone in severe legal jeopardy. But instead, there's this shrug of the shoulders. Well, what are you going to do? It's just he's our guy. But he's our guy because of a weird personal bond, not because of issues.
I think that's all right. And, you were kind of on top of this with the primary. I mean, if you want to pinpoint the date that Ron DeSantis lost, it was March 30th.
Yeah.
The day the first indictment was handed down. If you look, we can now look back at the polling And that, I think on March 30th, Ron DeSantis was 16 points down from Trump. And every day since then, the gap has essentially widened,
Yeah.
right? And that's the day Trump was indicted. And so it doesn't hurt him. It doesn't hurt him. But I will say,
well, the opposite. I mean, it
helps him. Yeah.
actively it helped. I mean, this is so warped. I mean, it's you got to step back. Like, this party has gotten so twisted up that it's set aside. I mean, you look at polling. There's clear internal division amongst Republicans about Ukraine. The biggest foreign policy challenge that the world faces, next to the Middle East, and that just gets papered over, even though Trump is holding a very, just to be charitable, very controversial view on this subject, and mind you, has as we talked about in the past show, in my past comments, a very fraught relationship with the current Israeli prime minister, bizarrely so. None of that is being discussed because the fact that Trump is being indicted has caused a circle the wagons effect for no rational reason, for a visceral emotional reason.
Yes. No, I mean, under normal conditions, the indictment would have destroyed a normal candidate. Never mind 4 indictments and 2 impeachments. But, Trump has these superpowers within the Republican Party. And they'd rather, if Love and Trump is wrong, they don't want to be right, Bill. And so that's just kind of where it is. And again, the big turning point for DeSantis, it was over the day that Trump was indicted. And we could say, maybe if DeSantis had handled it differently, we can always have that debate. But the bottom line is that anything that whatever doesn't kill Trump makes him stronger. And, it's tempting when you start to see all of these close confidants of Donald Trump, people who were part of his elite strike force, the Kraken, they are pleading guilty, presumably going to testify against Trump. And you would normally be tempted to write a lead that goes something like this: the walls are closing in on Donald Trump. And you can't write that because that has been written 100 times and the walls never actually close in on Donald Trump.
So we probably should wrap pretty soon, but I want to ask you 2 things before we close. So one is, this is sort of an unfair pundity question.
Okay, I've got Arizona in 7. Next question.
How many Republican presidential candidates drop out before Iowa?
Before Iowa.
Before Iowa.
Well, I don't know how many are still in the race.
Okay, so I mean, we're gonna have a cut, I think, for the next debate. That's not totally determined yet, but I think right now, I think
Mike Pence gets out before Iowa. Okay, so there's 1.
Christie.
I'm going to say Christie stays in. Maybe he shouldn't. I mean, at this point, I think Christie's entire premise, his entire argument was he's going to get Donald Trump on the debate stage. And remember, I was sympathetic. I thought he would. You knew he wouldn't, and you turned out to be right. And I think once that happened, Christie becomes irrelevant. Like there is no need for a Chris Christie to be in this race at that point.
Tim Scott.
I think Tim Scott stays in because I think he could pull off. If anyone could pull off, he's one of the people who could pull off kind of a miracle surprise win, like a Rick Santorum win in Iowa. So I think Tim Scott stays in through Iowa.
Haley.
I think she stays in.
DeSantis.
I'm going to say he drops out.
Ramaswamy.
He stays in.
So you think we will not have an acclamation ahead of Iowa? There will be a contest in Iowa.
No, I think Pence is out before Iowa and DeSantis is out. And I think in both cases, it's to avoid embarrassment. Further embarrassment.
What's more embarrassing?
I think coming in last is more embarrassing, and But you tell me. You asked me, am I crazy,
No,
or does that?
that's all fairly reasonable. I mean, I generally believe that staying in is largely a question of, do you have the money to pay your staff and to get on a plane? And if you have the money to stay in, you stay in just in case something happens. Um, and Christie, like, maybe he's got enough super PAC bankrolling him because people like the show, and he can hang on till Iowa. I mean, he clearly enjoys getting the TV time that he gets. So I don't
Yeah.
think he has to worry about like being embarrassed now. If he can hang on, he'll hang on. Like Pence is looking like the money is drying up. Um, uh, it seems like Haley has gotten some influx of cash. Um, so maybe she can
Well,
hang around. And Scott's
yeah.
been sitting on a lot of cash. Uh, I wonder if Scott might be like a Kamala who probably could have stayed in, but say, you know what, maybe it's just better for me and my future prospects if I get out and avoid the embarrassment. Maybe Scott could be the
I
VP,
can
for
see that
example.
because it does. I don't think he's got the fire in the belly. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm not saying he's not ambitious, but what I'm saying is I don't think he has to be president to be
yeah,
happy. You know what I
right.
mean? Whereas some people um, are, cannot. I think he would be pretty happy to be just to be a U.S. senator, and he's done himself some good. He's raised his name ID. He's helped himself. So yeah, he may get out for that reason.
And
Um,
DeSantis' money is definitely on the decline. He has Super PAC helping him out. Um, so maybe he wants to hang on for dear life. Maybe he's that stubborn, but I'm sure it's not implausible he's going to say, like, I just can't limp across the finish line here. This isn't going to work. Here's my chance to kiss Trump's ass again, like I did when I first ran for governor, and try to restore some burnt bridges before, and be able, so I can try to save my career in the future. So,
Second question, Bill.
so probably we don't have a total acclamation before Iowa, but assuming Trump wins Iowa, I imagine everyone drops out right after that. So my other
Yeah,
question to you, Matt, is
it was
what do you
just
make of Dean
crazy.
Phillips, who apparently is on the verge of announcing by the end of the week, because the Friday is the New Hampshire filing deadline. He did not file for Nevada, so he's not on the Nevada ballot, which is an early primary. New Hampshire is not even a sanctioned primary for Democrats because they moved their dates around. New Hampshire doesn't want to play ball. Biden's not going to be on the ballot there. But apparently Dean Phillips is thinking, I'm going to do a Eugene McCarthy thing in 68 where Lyndon Johnson wasn't on the ballot, but you go up there and you try to embarrass him and force him out of the race. We've seen a video of his bus. So he has a bus with his Dean Phillips for president, slapped on the side. He has apparently a permit for an event in New Hampshire on Friday. Does this matter at all?
I don't think so. It is interesting, right, that you've got these two wildly unpopular candidates, Biden versus Trump. I mean, just both of their approval ratings are low. I think Biden's is lower than Trump's, despite the four indictments and the two impeachments. And yet both are sailing as of now to the nomination of their respective parties. I mean, I think you could make a case where someone ought to get in and challenge Biden, and where he is vulnerable and all that. I don't think Dean Phillips is going to be the one to pull that maneuver off.
Yeah, he's not. He's not positioned to do this well, and I imagine it will be a very sad and depressing affair for him. Uh, and I'm not seeing it in polls yet. I to do it in the middle of a crisis is somewhat analogous to Ted Kennedy's challenge to Jimmy Carter in 1980, which happened in the midst of the Iran hostage crisis, when there was a big rally around the flag effect for Jimmy Carter, and it made the premise of Kennedy's candidacy awkward from the get-go. I mean, he managed to find his footing to some degree and win some primaries and make a show of it, but um, it was hard to explain why you want to challenge your own party's presidency in the middle of a serious foreign policy crisis, which Dean Phillips is doing right now. You're not seeing a big rally around the flag effect to Biden yet. I see a very slight uptick in his job approval in the Real Clear Politics average since the attack happened. I think Biden has carried himself very well.
Yeah. I mean, let me say, I mean, he's up in the Matameter. The speech, specifically the speech that Biden gave, I thought was fantastic.
I mean, I think there's some people that still see him as looking kind of haggard. Like, I don't think the dementia argument really holds a lot of water anymore.
Well, I've baked him into the cake. I'm not rating him on his charisma or his, being exciting. I'm just talking, if you go read the speech that Joe Biden gave, it was Reagan-esque in many ways. He is now carrying the mantle of, or call it Kennedy-esque, Fanny Price, Barney Burden, but peace through strength. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is criticizing our allies and praising, in some ways, our enemies and sucking up to them, where Biden is really providing. I thought it was a moral clarity, and I think he was really espousing kind of a Reaganite worldview in terms of foreign policy. If you believe in the stuff Reagan said about the evil empire and about America, the shining city on a hill, America being a beacon, a force for good, like that's all in Joe Biden's speech.
Of course, the catch for Biden is that not every Democrat wants a Reaganite foreign policy. Look, I think that Biden is definitely strengthening his bond with the Jewish community, including some progressive Jews. So the progressive Jewish community is divided over this, and he may be hurting himself in Arab American communities and Muslim American communities.
Like Michigan, by the way.
Michigan is the one state where that could really make a difference. And so maybe that ends up being a wash in your overall job approval. But I just think it is, regardless of your view of the policy, I think the performance, like he looks like he is in control of the situation as best as a American president can. He doesn't look like he doesn't know where he's standing. He doesn't know who the prime minister's name is. He has a view. He has a philosophy. He has a set of principles, and he's acting on them. Whereas on the Republican side, Trump, as the standard bearer, has a more muddled view of what we should be doing right now. He says stand with Israel, but he says that the Israeli prime minister, betrayed him personally, and he's very much on the opposite side of where Biden is when it comes to Ukraine. He wants to not fund Ukraine and trade away Ukrainian land for peace with Russia. So there is a potential for a very clear contrast in a Trump-Biden race on this subject. And I would think that would boost Biden up from like 40% approval over time. I can't say with confidence. It's certainly not happening instantaneously. But I would think some of the people are kind of like, I'm worried. The people who are just like, I'm worried he's just too old for the job. I would think there would be some reassurance that he can handle the job based on recent performance.
Yeah. We'll see if anything matters. I mean, I think the age thing is tough to overcome. And then the economy, and inflation. So if it's about the economy, Trump wins. If it is about defending liberal democracy, Biden wins. I mean, I think it's that simple.
I think it's way too early to say that the economy is a clear point in Trump's favor. We still got runway here. We're still in the midst of the soft landing, in my opinion. So I think the trajectory is on a good direction for the economy to be a point in Biden's favor come November 2024.
I think hope you're right. Think you're optimistic. Buying groceries,
I buy
Try buying a
groceries.
house right now. I mean, I think it's a tough thing to do. The American dream seems to be slipping from people. And look, I don't think we can blame Joe Biden. I think it's like musical chairs or whatever. But he's president, and the music stopped for a lot of people. So
I'm in the grocery store. I'm at the gas station pump. Prices have leveled, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be a point of irritation a year from now if the current trajectory continues. I mean, if things,
you'd be proud of me, Bill. I pulled somebody put a sticker of Joe Biden pointing to the price of gas on a gas pump, saying I did
yeah,
this or
I was
something.
seeing that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know
I pulled
where
one
I
of
am right now. I'm buying gas for about $3.40, which is like maybe a little bit higher than it was at the end of Trump. Of course, the prices collapsed because we're in the middle of the pandemic. So it's not a good benchmark. Like 340 is not like a crazy price for gas. You're at $5. That's much more shocking.
Bill, final thoughts or plugs?
Well, check out the Washington Monthly newsletter. I got to decide what I'm going to write about for tomorrow for my weekly column. But you can sign up for the Washington Monthly newsletter both at the WashingtonMonthly.com website and at Substack.
Shout out to Tyson Bagent. Do you know about this guy, Bill?
I do not.
Graduate of Martinsburg High School in West Virginia, graduate of Shepherd University.
Your university.
Where I went to school. By the way, I am the most, as of today, still considered the most notable graduate, which is a rather dubious distinction, I am well aware, but maybe not for long, because this kid, Tyson Bagent, is an undrafted free agent. He was basically the backup to the backup quarterback for the Chicago Bears, and he won the first NFL game he's ever started last week. So maybe he'll be a flash in the pan, or maybe he's the next Brock Purdy, Kurt Warner type of guy, underestimated by everybody. So it's fun to see a homeboy doing well in the NFL, Bill.
Well, I have some football news to share with you, Matt. The Northampton Middle School Blue Vikings are in first end of the season in first place, so they get a bye week, and so I think they have to win one game to make it to the Super Bowl. And my youngest is on the cheer squad, so I'm going to all the games now, Matt. You're very proud of me.
What I love about you,
living
Bill,
the American dream here.
You live the most middle American life of anyone, the most conservative lifestyle of anybody I know. You're going to Friday Night Lights, your daughter's cheering at the games. You are living the dream. I have to say.
Morning in America, Matt.
I know you could be in West Virginia. I mean, welcome to the real world of America. And amazingly, it's in Northampton, Massachusetts.
All right. Good to talk to you, Matt.
Good talking to you. I'm not sure that anybody learned much, but now we know who Tyson Bagent is. Some guy named Johnson, who may or may not become speaker, and just stay tuned, and maybe we'll have to do an emergency episode if this whole thing falls apart. But
fair enough.
Hopefully that won't happen.
All right. Until next week.
See ya.